Okay, so in this video, we want to see what it takes to deploy a Red Hat OpenShift cluster on the IBM Cloud, fully managed by IBM. So let's get started. As you can see here on my screen, I'm logged into the dashboard for my account on the IBM Cloud. To create a Kubernetes or OpenShift cluster, we'll need to go into the menu, down to Containers, over to Clusters. And this will give us a list of existing clusters that we might have already. As you can see, I've got one OpenShift cluster already running. We're going to go ahead and create a second cluster in this environment as well. We click on Create Cluster, and now we are on the ordering screen for the OpenShift or Kubernetes, depending on what flavor you want to install. In this scenario, we're going to choose Red Hat OpenShift, and we'll go ahead and scroll down to Infrastructure. So we can choose between deploying into a classic environment, a VPC that we might have already previously created, or if we didn't have one created, we could create one now, or even on satellite. So satellite is an offering where we can deploy a OpenShift cluster down into your own data center, and it still be fully managed by IBM. In this scenario, we're just going to select VPC, and we're going to select a VPC that has already been previously created. I'm just going to do this in Colton Demo, and that's going to be in the US South region data center. That makes up 3 separate availability zones that we can choose from. So I have 3 subnets already created in this region for this VPC. I'm actually only going to deploy some workers in a single zone. So I'm going to go ahead and toggle off 2 of these zones. I don't need a very big cluster for this demo. We're just going to kind of go and deploy a very small one. And we can continue to scroll down through the ordering system and select our OpenShift version. As you can see here, we've got 4.17 listed, and then I can even go back to older versions if I needed to. Supporting my application might require a specific version currently, or I might have an on-premise OpenShift cluster that's already running 4.15, and I want to migrate my applications from an on-premise environment over to the cloud and just keep it consistent from when I first do my migration. In this scenario, we're going to go ahead and just select the 4.16. Next option is how we are going to choose about paying for a OpenShift license. As you can see here, I've got the option to apply my OCP entitlement or purchase a license. When you purchase a license, it gets billed into the hourly within the worker nodes as well. So you're paying for that license throughout the term that you're actually using this cluster. If you happen to be deploying IBM software, such as Maximo or maybe a Cloud Pak, like Cloud Pak for Data, you could leverage the entitlements that are provided with those licenses to cover your OpenShift license on this side, and that's where you would go in and apply that OCP entitlement. We will be installing on this cluster in the future some IBM software that will be covered within the entitlement, so we're going to go ahead and leave that checked. But in your scenario, if you're just deploying your own applications or going to use the operators within OpenShift to deploy some like a database or your applications, you're just going to go and also select purchase a license, and it'll automatically be added to your account within this cluster. So we'll scroll down to our worker pool. This is going to create a default worker pool for this cluster. As you can see here, it's showing by default, it's going to start with 3 workers per zone. I did select up above that I only want it deployed in one zone. So it's going to give me a total of 3 workers. If I did go and toggle back up there at the US South 2, and I wanted to span across the 2 zones, you can see here it reflects down here that I'm going to create 3 worker nodes per zone, giving me a total of 6 worker nodes. In this scenario, I really just need 2 workers, and I don't even need 2 zones. I'm just going to keep 2 workers in a single zone and give that total here. The other thing that you can look at here is the flavor of that worker node that you are planning to provision within this default worker pool. I actually need a little bit more vCPU in memory. So I'm going to go into change flavor and go and find an 8x32 because this is going to be perfect for our application in the future. So I'm selecting here. In your case, if you needed some GPU, those are still options as well. Or if you need more RAM intensive profiles, we've got some, larger memory spec to vCPU ratio profiles as well. In my scenario, I really just need this BX2 8x32, and that's going to be perfect for us. So we're going to do and save that worker flavor. One of the other options in here is that you can select the operating system that you actually want to run on below under the scenes. Rel 8, Rel 9, or CoreOS. I'm actually going to change that to CoreOS as well. And we're just going to keep that as the 8x32. So I'm going to save that worker flavor. So we're going to provision 2 worker nodes of the 8x32s. We can scroll a little bit further down. Now we've got our option for doing our worker pool encryption. This is in the scenario where you might have a key management service already in your account and you wanted to connect this cluster to that key management service for encrypting the worker nodes. We do have a instance in our account already, but I'm actually going to go ahead and toggle that off as I don't need this for the demo currently. Our network settings, you can choose between having public endpoint as well as private or just private only. In my scenario, I'm going to have it selected as public and private to where I can communicate from a remote location to connect into this cluster. Otherwise, I would need a VPN or direct link that would give me access into that VPC that we have created. And that's another route that you could do and select the private endpoint only. For this demo, I'm just going to keep it as private and public. For the internal registry, we can select a cloud object storage instance that you might have in your account. I'm going to go ahead and connect it to the cloud object storage instance that I have provisioned. This is going to then utilize the internal registry of my OpenShift cluster to then store those containers and such in the object storage. Under security, we've got a couple parameters here. Outbound traffic protection. So by default, this is turned on. This is denying the access for any of the worker nodes to communicate outbound to the internet. I actually do need these worker nodes for this demo in the future to actually communicate outbound. So I'm going to go ahead and toggle that off. This is kind of giving you a little bit warning that you are turning that off and then allowing outbound connectivity. And again, it is only outbound connectivity happening from the worker nodes outbound to the internet. I'm going to disable that. Then cluster encryption. So again, if we have a key management service, this is going to allow us to utilize it for any of the secrets that we might deploy or store in the cluster itself. Again, I'm just going to go ahead and untoggle that. And then we have the option to utilize a secrets manager to then also be used for any of the secrets that my applications might need, that I can store those secrets in the IBM Cloud Secrets Manager service. And then even on top of that, if you have a KMS, you could leverage it to also encrypt those secret manager instance as well. We're not going to use that in this scenario here either. And then VPC security groups, if I had additional security group things that I needed to add to this cluster. We could specify them here. I'm just going to go ahead and leave it as the default that gets created. That's already created in my VPC itself. But then also when I deploy this cluster, if there's some rules in the VPC that are needed for the OpenShift cluster communication and everything across my VPC, those are going to get created by default as well. I'm just going to leave those. Next option is to name our cluster. So we're just going to give it kind of a simple name. Let's do encoding demo just one, right? And then I can select the resource group that we want this to get deployed into. I'm just going to select a resource group and then go down. That's about everything that we need for provisioning the cluster. We can look at some of the integrations that can get applied as well. So my account already has an activity tracker instance deployed. So what it's going to do is it's tracking all activity within the cloud portal that's happening when provisioning resources or deleting resources or making modifications. It's doing all that tracking. So when I hit click create, it's actually going to track that I'm creating a cluster. And then if anybody ever comes in and makes modifications to this cluster or deletes the cluster, it'll also track that activity. So that's on by default in my account. I can add a logging instance that we may have in the account already to this cluster. So as soon as this cluster is up and provisioned, it's already going to be sending some of the log metrics over to that logging instance. I'm going to go ahead and select the instance that we have in our Dallas environment. Since this is in the US South region, we'll use the US South Cloud Logs instance. And then also for monitoring, I want to tie a monitoring instance so we can check on some of the applications that get deployed in the future and do some tracking of that, and also tracking the cluster itself. I am not going to need workload protection currently, so I'm going to go ahead and toggle that off. We will cover some workload protection and other aspects in a future video, so we will turn this on, or maybe provision another cluster and go through some of that in a future video. But for the sake of this one, we're just going to keep it simple and just attach monitoring itself. We'll go with an existing instance, and again, let's go find one that's in the Dallas South region. So with that, let's just kind of like skim over some of our settings. We've got 2 worker nodes of 8x32 getting deployed. We are going to apply the entitlement because we're going to deploy some software in the future. Everything looks good. It's the right VPC. Yeah, so let's go ahead and click create. So what this is going to go do, it's going to validate a couple of things right now. And then it's going to start the provisioning process of this OpenShift cluster into the VPC. First thing what it's going to do is going to go and provision those master nodes, the master nodes that we don't care about because we don't have to manage those. They're going to be fully managed. We don't even see them, right? We just see that there's going to be 2 worker nodes being deployed in our environment. So as we can see here, just tracking the progress, we can go over to worker pool. We're doing a default worker pool. It's showing that 0 of the workers are being activated yet out of the 2 that we're requesting. And then we can see the worker nodes here is still 0. It's just kind of going through and preparing the masters. And then it'll continue on with the workers as well. So this is going to take maybe about 45 minutes. So let's just pause the video here. And I will check back soon once this provisioning is either a little bit further along or once it has completed and it's all healthy and ready to go. So see you then. Okay, so it looks like the OpenShift cluster is done provisioning. Let's take a look. Everything looks healthy here. We've got our ingress. We've got 2 worker nodes that we deployed. Actually, thinking about it, I might scale that up to a third worker. So we'll do that in here in a second. Let's just kind of glance through. Here's our cluster ID. Networking's good. I can turn off my I have my public and private enabled here. That outbound traffic protection, I have it disabled. Like if I wanted to later, after maybe everything's configured and such, then I could turn that on if I needed. I've got my integrations of my logging and monitoring. As you can see, I mean, just as simple as just clicking launch. Ooh, that's bright. And that will go and log us into the logging instance directly. So you can see here, it goes directly in. Got some errors already happening. That's probably just through some of the provisioning and scaling up and down of the worker nodes itself. So let's go out of that real quick. We'll do a deeper dive in another video on logging and monitoring, but also just like monitoring, I can click, or just like logging, I can click on the monitoring and it'll automatically log me into the IBM Cloud dashboard here. So we can see just by default, it's directly into that cluster. I can go over to some other dashboards, predefined dashboards here. I can look at my CPU and memory limits of that instance. And again, I mean, we just spun this thing up. It's not really doing anything, so there's not a lot of metrics here. Again, we'll do a later deep dive into some of the logging and monitoring. One thing that I do want to do is there is already the block storage add-on for the VPC block tied to this cluster. I do also anticipate potentially using some file storage. So I need to go ahead and install the file storage capability. So this is as simple as just clicking, choosing my version. I'm just going to go with the default and clicking install. That's going to go off and provision the capability for enabling the file storage in my cluster. Some of the other add-ons that you can quickly see, we've got our new Red Hat OpenShift AI add-on. We actually may end up deploying this in this cluster and going through some tutorials on some of that, but we're going to do that in the very near future. We could also deploy OpenShift Data Foundation if we needed more scalable software-defined storage for our workers or our applications, our workloads. So we could deploy OpenShift Data Foundation into this cluster if needed. We don't necessarily need that. We're just going to leverage the existing block and file capability within the IBM Cloud VPC. And then some other tools if we needed to find any static routes, set up a cluster autoscaler if needed. But we're not going to install any other add-ons to this today. But again, let's go back and see what it might take to scale up this cluster from just 2 workers to a third worker. So as you can see here, we just have the 2 workers. If I go over to worker pool, I just have my default worker pool, which is just the 2 workers per zone. If I wanted to, I could go in and add zones, or I could just resize the existing worker pool in the single zone to a new size, either scale it up or down. There is a requirement for the default, or at least an initial worker pool for an OpenShift cluster to have 2 workers at minimum. So we're going to at least just scale up to a third one. And let's go ahead and click resize. And what that's going to do is it's going to make the difference here. It says worker nodes per zone 3, actual declared workers with 2 of 3. So it's going to go off and start provisioning that third worker for us. So that's as simple as that for just scaling up and down a cluster. You can just come in here and click a couple things. Let's go back over to overview. So while that cluster is up and provisioning that third worker, we still have a functioning OpenShift cluster. If we want to log into the console of the OpenShift cluster, all we need to do here is click on OpenShift Web Console. This is going to then authenticate us. Ooh, that's bright as well. It's going to authenticate us with our IAM that I was using in my IBM Cloud account. This is logging me in directly as the creator of this cluster as well. Go ahead and change this real quick so it's not so bright. And then we'll just jump back over to the overview page. So we've got some of our, some of the messaging that's coming up. This is, again, just a fresh install. So it's going through some of the configuration and everything right now. We can go and take a look at a few things. Our compute here, we've got our 2 nodes. We should see that third one pop in pretty soon. We can go into our storage. So by default, we've got our storage classes that are defined by the VPC block that was already installed. And look here, we can also see that now we have our VPC file as well. So we've enabled that add-on for the file storage as well as block. There's lots of different storage classes that you can use. If you needed 5 IOP or 10 IOP or custom IOP performance disk added to your applications. When you deploy your application, you just specify the storage class you want, and it'll utilize one of these. We can go into, from there, it's pretty much just the standard OpenShift, right? So you're just getting a deployed OpenShift container platform that's fully managed by IBM. So we can just go and kind of take a look. None of the operator hub has finished installing, but we'll come back at a later time and look at some of that. It's needing to reach out and go and pull that catalog. So yeah, this is how you can access the OpenShift console here. And let's go ahead and jump back. Add-on status, that's still showing pending, even though we did see those storage classes. This should be probably finishing up. It's probably just not picked it up on this side yet. Worker nodes, we still see that as deploying. So everything looks good. We're just still kind of like through some of the provisioning process, getting this cluster up and running. So I think that's it for this video, but we'll check back very soon and maybe keep working with this cluster and start adding some applications, maybe doing some AI and other stuff along with it. So thanks for watching.